Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel YNR Daily Spoiler. Diane hid the identity of Kaylee's real father.
No more lies. DNA bombshell. Victor reveals the results. Diane HID Kyle's real father. Victor stood on stage wearing a tuxedo that proclaimed more than money. It said mastery. He greeted the audience with a languid, silky cadence of a man who has withstood everything and turned it into power. Nikki appeared smaller than normal with a friendlier smile, whereas Jack Abbott, despite his outward composure, had an edge to his jaw. He had a private fight to worry about. The Abbott-Newman feud was more than simply business ballroom strategy. It had become a matter of family. Kyle Abbott observed from a corner, with the anxious gaze of someone who had been educated to internalize public poise. He had learned to be the forgiving son when the public needed a face for a merger, as well as the son who grinned through private ambushes. He and Diane have a strong, tangled past as mother and child, bonded by love and thorny secrets. Diane Jenkins' presence today, bright calm, yet with a weight Kate would have recognized, added a distinct note to the gala's music. Nobody expected the event to change direction in the way it did. Nobody expected Victor to use the night the world celebrated to carry out a clandestine execution. Victor concluded his remarks to moderate applause, and the audience settled into champagne-laced chat. Reporters encircled the buffet. As glasses were refilled and donors mingle, Victor asked for stillness once more, his voice cutting through the discussion like a razor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and the audience immediately leaned in. "There's a personal matter I must address before we let the evening continue." There was a hush, an apprehensive, delightful kind of hush. Victor enjoyed being heard. "I'm a man who believes in the truth," he added. "Sometimes telling the truth costs everything. Tonight, I've decided to pay that price." He motioned, and an assistant brought a tiny file forward. Cameras were craned. Phones tilted like sunflowers. Victor focused on his family's expressions first. Nikki's careful support, Adam's mask of curiosity, Victoria's watchful calm, and a faintly pricked Jack among the audience, attempting to disguise his anxiety of the material. Victor's gaze settled on Diane and Kyle. Diane's smile flickered like candlelight, and Kyle's drink floated through his hand, as if clutching it would anchor him. "Some weeks ago," Victor said, "a tip arrived at my workplace. Irene, a lab technician with integrity, came me with information indicating that a certain foundation transfer was abnormal. It was initially dismissed as an accounting error, then further irregularities arose. I was sufficiently concerned to authorize an independent review." Heads turned. Slim murmuring began. Victor's voice dropped, and even those closest leaned in. "That review prompted us to request a DNA match to corroborate an old file. I requested the greatest standard, an independent laboratory with a sealed chain of custody. The findings are conclusive." He let the pause linger in the room like a pause breath. Then he landed the final blow. "The findings indicate that Kyle Abbott's biological father is not the man he has spent his life believing. Diane, you hid this fact. You purposefully mislead people and corporations to prepare a future for your son. Kyle is my biological son, as confirmed by DNA." The sound that followed was not applause. It was a single collective intake of breath that appeared to deplete the room's oxygen supply. Champagne flutes paused midway to the lips. Conversations died. Kyle's eyes widened in surprise and dread. Diane's mouth dropped wide as if she'd been struck, and a single droplet of sweat trembled on her temple. Jack's face changed color, the courteous mask breaking to show something older, sharper, and more ferocious. He'd always known the Abbott genealogy could be convoluted, but this eruption reshaped family maps. Clarence recalled earlier discussions, like ghosts with teeth. "You can't be serious," Ashley said, her voice rough with astonishment. Victor persisted, merciless and steadfast. "I've asked that the lab report be made available to anyone who require it. But for the time being, I felt compelled to inform the room that there would be no more lies. If Kyle is Victor Newman's son, the name will represent a different future. I wanted Kyle to hear it from me first, before a news release could speak for him." Diane's cheeks had turned pale. All of the polished serenity she'd practiced for charity events collapsed into something visceral. Her hand reached out to steady Kyle before stopping, assessing the cost of contact. Kyle's first motion was to stomp forth, denying the possibility. He left the mob that had previously been his audience and went to the balcony to breathe cool air. When your world had just unmade itself, the city lights appeared like they belonged on another planet. How the bombshell was discovered. This was not a spontaneous headline. The road to Victor's declaration had been difficult, challenging, and deeply personal. Holden Rhodes, a private investigator with a patient mind, had been following the trail for weeks after a worried contributor spotted inconsistencies in grant payments. He had initially shared those data with Diane's inner group, out of concern rather than accusation. Claire had handled the initial discovery with the care of someone who understood how a single rumor could change a life. Irene, the lab technician who first raised an eyebrow, discovered a trend in archive delivery and donor records that did not line up. A file was misnumbered and tucked away during the shuffle that occurs when foundations accept gifts. It appeared to be clumsy management at first, but then more deliberate things emerged. Redacted authorizations, consultancies registered to shell firms, and signatures with metadata pointing to a private email, a secret machine used by a manager with direct access to approvals. At the heart of the approvals, the consultant who approved the problematic transfer was a name the foundation had brought in years previously at Diane's request, a name that donors had not questioned because Diane's word carried trust. The paper trail accused the consultant of funneling monies into an intermediate business. The DNA twist, however, was the ultimate pain. It came from an old file. When Kyle was born, several medical samples were taken for normal purposes. A hospital register that had been wrongly preserved revealed a misplaced accession number for a neonatal sample. When Victor's legal team discovered it, they demanded that the sample be analyzed, believing that at worst, they could rectify a donor ledger. When the DNA was returned and the lab compared the results to Victor's and the Abbott family, the conclusion stunned everyone. The signs pointed to Victor, not the guy Kyle, and the public, supposed to be his father. The lab, being cautious and conservative, delivered the chain of custody record directly to Victor. Victor, who had spent his life being startled by scandals as much as creating them, picked the stage of his gala to reveal the truth to the public. Diane's secret, motivation, and confession. The room suddenly felt smaller. Diane, surrounded by 100 attentive eyes, found her voice with the ragged strength of someone who had been keeping an impossible secret. "It is true," she said. "When I was younger, I made decisions to ensure Kyle's safety. I loved him. I wasn't sure what else to do." Her statements were a form of confession preceding the inevitable breakdown. People moved closer. Jack, of all persons known for legal acid and calculated vengeance, pushed his way to the front. "You lied," Jack replied. "You lied to my family and the people who trusted you. You used our son." "Jack," Kyle snarled, the man in him burning. "Don't." But betrayal had already altered allegiance. Diane's hands rushed to her lips as she saw her son turn to Jack, the man who had reared him with great affection. "I met Victor the year I was pregnant," she said, her voice quiet in the large space. "We had a brief relationship. I was horrified by the Newman world. I doubted he would accept me or us. I kept it quiet because I was afraid it would damage Kyle." "All of that would have been easier to hear if you hadn't lied," Jack said. "You hid it, Diane. You sewed us into the untruth." "I was trying to give Kyle the life I couldn't," she added, and the crowd felt the harshness of reality. "If I had informed Victor, he would have taken control. I considered small-town options. I figured if Kyle had a basic childhood, he'd have a chance at a normal life." Kyle glanced at Diane as if he had discovered a mis-painted image. "You chose what was easy for you," he told me, "not what was honest for me." He retreated, the world around him rearranging names, inheritances, and commitments in ways he couldn't recognize. The truth had peeled him like a fruit, and now he had to deal with its taste. Victory claims and kingmaker games. Victor's announcement was never purely personal. It had business friction weaved in, with the men and women around him sent an opportunity. If Kyle is technically my son, Victor softly told Nikki later, away from the press, then the Newmans have moral and legal obligations. We must be measured. Nikki, tough in her own way, saw the human cost. You lit a bomb in a charity gala, she murmured. Now pick up the pieces with care. Victor, on the other hand, was always looking at the chessboard. There would be repercussions on the boardroom floor. Kyle's name was biologically related to Victor Newman, which meant the Newman Empire had new branches to consider. Jack understood the threat immediately. This changes everything, he yelled at the neutral counsel. If Victor pursues parental claims or influence, Jabot and Newman dealings will be complicated. But Victor argued that he had no immediate plans. His motivation, he reasoned, was truth. I won't weaponize this, he told those closest to him. This is grown-up life. Kyle has the right to choose who he wants to be. His comments were measured, but the audience smelt the possibility of a takeover like rain before a storm. Legal consultants began discreetly sketching possibilities, while gossip columns sharpened their blades. Emotional hurricane. The consequences echoed across registers. In private hotel corridors, whispered corporate chats, and the domestic stillness of family kitchens. Kyle, the focal point of this upheaval, relocated as if in a dream, with new doorways in previously known spaces. He faced Diane in the Newman private drawing room, where he'd previously hosted birthday parties. The framed images from his childhood now had new captions in his imagination. I trusted you, Kyle replied simply. Diane's eyes widened. I apologize. I believed I could protect you. I thought I was doing the correct thing. You did as you thought. But now what? Kyle inquired. He appeared to have had his life, identity, loyalty, sense of self, removed and rebuilt by others. I want to make it right, Diane said quietly. I want to tell you everything. The truth about the night, the dread that drove me. I'll tell you everything if you listen. Kyle's face relaxed, then hardened. Forgiveness would not be immediate. The truth does not always accept it. But he listened. The conversation moved through the past in long, excruciating strings. The connection, Diane's calculation, and the years of love and false certainty. Meanwhile, Jack stood as if the entire city had been presented to him as a blade. He accused Diane of treason and Victor of opportunism. You went public, he told Victor one night on the Newman lawn, and now you have to deal with the repercussions. Families are shredded for less. Victor's reaction was uncomfortably calm. Truth is a necessary tearing, he explained. You may resent me for bringing it up, but I did what I felt was right. Jack left the session with a vow on his lips. He would defend Kyle, even if that meant drafting legal documents and claims for the rest of his life. Diane's defense and laboratory evidence. Diane's argument would not hold up in court based just on emotion. The lab report, which was detailed, supported by a chain of custody, and independently validated, possessed power that the human heart lacked. Diane's defense switched to motive and mens rea. She hadn't fabricated tests, but she had suppressed the truth. The question is, does such omission constitute wrongdoing? The DA's office launched a preliminary investigation to ensure that no fraud had happened with donor cash or in documented authorizations related to the foundation schemes that had set this all off. Diane's acts were ethically grave. Whether they were criminal would be determined by subpoenas and forensic accountants. Irene, the lab tech, who had started the chain reaction by pointing out the misfiled accession number, was now in the midst of the media frenzy. She had done what her conscience commanded, an act that had triggered a family's fault lines. Some praised her, but others branded her meddlesome. Irene remained silent, allowing the laboratory's numbers to speak for themselves. Kyle's choices, the city's judgment, and lingering questions. The scandal did not finish in a single night. It turned into weeks of media knocking on doors and donors whispering in supermarkets. Kyle was threatened by opinion. Some told him to embrace his Newman heritage, while others advised him to cut links with the manipulative family. Jack painted an image of a father who had raised his son more effectively than any DNA could. Victor provided assistance that alternated between paternal and calculated. And Diane, who'd concealed the truth that ruined a life, confronted the most naked issue of all. Could the person who lied become the person who confessed and attempted amend? Kyle and Victor went to the Newman archives in a calm, human setting to explore questions about legacy, what it meant to wear a name, and what obligations came with it. Victor, who was unaccustomed to requesting anything in exchange for the truth, told stories of elder Newmans who had loved and failed. Kyle listened, cautious but fascinated. He had to determine whether biological reality outweighed the years of parenthood Jack had provided him. Did love trump marks on a lab printout? In the boardrooms, Jabot's lawyers and Newman's counsel navigated the potentially turbulent waters ahead. Shares, trusts, access. Everything revolves around soap operas. But the human tale, the true anchor, was quieter. Diane trying to rebuild trust with Kyle trying to define himself, Jack trying to protect his son, and Victor trying to reconcile being the man who told the truth with the man who could gain from it. When the dust had cleared enough for the city to breathe, there were no clean ends. Diane had altered the path of her life with a secret. Victor had revealed the information in the most public forum possible. Kyle was left with options he had not requested. In that transitional space between headline and heart, everyone had to decide, slowly, painfully, whether truth offered on the altar of spectacle healed or harmed the people it purported to liberate. Epilogue, a night of small decisions. Weeks later, the gala felt like another existence. The foundation remained under audit. Donors were pacified with legal assurances. The lab report was kept in a sealed envelope and discussed in 1,000 diner conversations. Diane and Kyle sat in a little cafe distant from the Newman Gardens. She read him the letter she wrote the night she decided to keep the secret, an apology that tasted like the only honest cash she had left. Kyle listened, eyes distant yet tender, before saying, in a voice not yet reconciled but attempting to be bold, "I need time. I need to find out who I want to be, what name I want to use, and why." Jack, unyielding as ever, swore that he would battle anyone who attempted to use Kyle's new nature to hurt his kid. Victor, on the other hand, promised to leave Kyle alone unless Kyle asked him otherwise, a commitment that sounded more like temptation than restraint. For a city that prides itself on reinventing itself, the site was full of new possibilities. Old alliances would fray, and new ones would put their stitching to the test. Diane's confession triggered a DNA bombshell, reshaping identities. It was unclear if the destruction would result in something truer or merely different. The truth had been stated. Victor had declared, no more lies. And for the first time in a long time, a Newman family secret had been laid bare. The city would return to the question, nightly and noisily, not whether the labs had been correct. The challenge was both moral and human. In a society when bloodlines are currency, could someone purchase their way back into their son's heart? Or had Diane permanently changed the story such that even an apology could never fully unfold? Genoa City shone its neon above the silence of individual reckonings. The headlines went on. People who lived at night had to live during the day. And somewhere between coffee and court files, Kyle Abbott realized that the only person who could determine what his name signified was himself.